listening to Second Wind with Joyce Buford, where women who are ready to expand their life adventure discover the tools to stop playing small and tap into the courage required to enjoy their second wind. Welcome.
Good morning. It is great to know that you're out there today. And as usual, we have a great show for you. It's kind of going to be a little different show because we got a man we're interviewing today. And it's great to have a man on the show sometimes. We are going to be talking about some interesting information that we as women, unless you've been in the services as a woman, are not quite as familiar with. And so he may go off into some direction that we may need to say, I wonder what he's talking about. But he promises me he's not going to do that because I would be going, what is he talking about? So anyway, I'm excited that he's chosen to share some of the journey that he has had in his life. Let me tell you just a little bit about it. He was born in Menominee. Is that correct?
Menominee Falls.
Oh, guess where that is? In Wisconsin. On December 21st, almost a baby, almost a childlike, in 1975. Lived with various relatives and went to approximately 15 different schools. I'd say that was a variety of schools. Didn't you, Gene? Mm-hmm. A few more than you wanted, probably. Mm-hmm. And then he did earn his GED in 1994. So after he did that, he decided the best place for him was to go in to enlist into the United States Marine Corps. And so he did. And that's where our story starts today with Gene Bennett. So welcome, Gene. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, we're delighted. As you can tell, we don't have many men on this show. Mm-hmm. So we're really glad to have you on here. Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about, you are here because you have written a book, correct?
Right. I wrote a book, and the name of it is We Did Not Deserve the Crapper. That's the main title. The subtitle is The Prison We Entered But Never Fully Left, or Never Left. Yeah, Never Left works.
Yeah. You're talking about a certain period of time that you were in service, not your entire time in service.
Right. It's just a really, it's the entertaining and dysfunctional stuff, which sometimes that kind of gets crossed up, because of what we call gallows humor. It's how we cope with horribly traumatic and dysfunctional things.
Yeah. So, but this is a group book, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You've got gathered some friends together that are comrades, let's say, to put input into a particularly, what would you call that experience?
Horribly dysfunctional. As a matter of fact, we were the only internment facility to house juveniles, and it was, the problem was, I became something of a project manager in the project process of writing the book. And it technically, just with the guys that I wrote it with, this book should have been done like 3 or 4 years ago. The problem is the first editor, I put one story about my childhood at the very end to cap the book. I thought, that's it. It's going to be published. No, he says, I need more of that for character development for you. And what he referred to my book as before I put all the character development in. Oh, by the way, he didn't give me any lateral limits or criteria. Or rules of engagement. He just gave me more of that. Yeah. So, and then my family got involved too. Yeah.
Writing a book is really a journey. It takes all sorts of twists and turns depending upon your publisher and who's giving you support.
Right.
But bravo that you got through it. And you had 5 or 6 of your buddies that was helping you in creating that book?
Okay, it was 3 or 4 of my buddies from my compound, one guy from one compound over. And then when I got into the character development for myself, it was, and this is where things got nasty. It was my mother and my aunt who fight with each other all the time. And my father, and that just made it such a combustible situation for me, because they were all telling those dirty, nasty truths that really you don't want to necessarily tell. So at some point they were all pissed at me. They were all mad at me because I was trying to strike a balance. Yeah.
Your parents were part of your writing crew, or your ideas for your book?
They were contributors.
Contributors, really?
And at the last minute, my aunt in the book, she literally reads the introduction and says, you need to republish this and take this out because it might be offensive. She went full Karen to the point where I actually had to hang up the phone.
Yeah, sometimes family's not the best critiquers, you know.
Oh no.
It's your person, the key person from the book place.
Right.
Probably sure that's going to be. But you kind of your growing up years were really pretty abnormal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really kind way to put it, but yeah.
Yeah, because 15 different schools, you moved a lot or
moved a lot. Yeah. I went from my parents' house. My parents never really had a place their own, and they broke up, and it was they would always drop me off when my parents were together. They'd drop me off at my grandparents' house.
Oh,
then they move into the basement. So I lived down in the basement with them. Then it went from there to a place out in a little town called Waukesha, Wisconsin. And then they eventually broke up after my mother and my father because my father's a Vietnam vet. So he would have flashbacks, and mom would stand up to him. And that's when the fighting would start, you know, and then
so your family has always been in the service. They've served the country.
As far as I know, is the farthest back that my family service goes is my uncle Chuck, my great uncle Chuck, who survived the Battle of the Bulge. And apparently he had a piece of shrapnel about a quarter inch from his heart. He got so bad, he would literally have a stroke a year, and you could set your watch by it. He was the toughest old bird I'd ever met in my life. And then my uncle Ralph was in the Marine Corps, and he was on Tarawa in the Pacific. So I had two great uncles on either end.
Lots of history.
Oh yeah. I've
got an family.
I've got an uncle who was Air Force. My dad was in the Army in Vietnam, and I was in the Corps. And then I joined the Army after that.
Yeah. Well, how did that prepare? I just want to kind of look at this. How did that growing years, the family, help support you and nudge you toward your choice to go into the Marines? Why did you choose the Marines?
Oh, you want that story? Okay, you're gonna get a kick out of this. Okay, so this is in the book, pretty much in the beginning, almost. So my aunt and I, one of my other aunt, who doesn't like my aunt, who's acting like a Karen, God bless her.
Yeah.
If my aunt were to read this book, she'd laugh herself to tears and say that my grandma was gonna just absolutely kill me if she read the book. So I'm staying with that aunt, right? And I was 18 years old, young and stupid. My big mouth overrode my good sense. Okay. My aunt,
that's pretty normal at that age.
Oh yes, absolutely. So my aunt is mad at me because I ran my mouth. We're driving from Menominee Falls to the north side of Wisconsin, where she used to live. And we normally would drive past this Goodwill. There's an exit that would take us to where there's a Goodwill right there.
Right.
Normally we would drive past it. She gets off that exit. I'm like, oh boy, okay, what's going on here? And I forgot that I had a lot of my stuff in her trunk of her giant Pontiac Catalina, which is the equivalent of a Cadillac, you know, like I'm talking like two Priuses long. This thing was enormous.
Yes.
Okay. So she pulls in, she gets out of the car. She grabs my stuff out of her ginormous trunk, which could have fit the fire team of Marines, which is 4 Marines. I mean, it's that big. I'm talking gear and all. And she walks into the Goodwill. She drops my stuff at the front desk. She goes to sign me in, and I'm standing.
She leaves you at Goodwill?
Almost. She looks at me. She says, "Is this for the military?" I look at the guy. He's to my right. He's about 20 feet away from me. He had a bottle of booze in his hand, and I could smell him as well as I could see him. I take one look at him, and I say to myself, "No way I'm going out like that." So I said, "All right, you win. I'll join the military." Because I only had a GED, I
Yeah.
could only join the Marines. She said, I figured you'd be
Oh,
dumb enough to pick the hardest one. I'm like, thanks, appreciate it.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so
Well,
that's the story.
I think people don't guys like to join the Marine?
Well, here's the thing about it. It just depends on what you want to do with yourself, how you want to develop yourself personally and professionally.
Right.
If you want to do all the crazy buck wild stuff, you either join the Marines or you join Spec Ops. If you want to use it as a professional development, you do stuff like Intel, or you join the Air Force, where you can do either be a fighter pilot or maintain vehicles. I did it, well, for obvious reasons, but I chose to be a diesel technician because that's what I like to do. And yeah,
You like to work on cars or planes or
cars.
Mechanical
cars.
Okay. So you chose the Marines.
Yes.
And then you were, let's see, then what happened?
All right. I spent my first 4 years in the Marine Corps as a mechanic in a Marine infantry unit. They said you need the Marine Infantry Division is like a black hole. It just sucks you in and you don't get out. So I got out of the Corps and I joined the Army National Guard while I was still married, because I got married while I was in the Corps. Ended up getting divorced when I joined the National Guard, or after I joined the National Guard.
Right.
Then went from the National Guard into the reserves because the National Guard said you need to become an infantryman. And I'm like, there's no gentle, loving, and civil way to say how I replied to them and gave them the most graphic directions as possible on where they could stick that suggestion.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Oh, no problem. And I'm going to tell you a story that happened downrange to kind of help you out with why there's such a disconnect between the military and civilians as far as language and how colorful it is. I'll explain that here.
I want to get into the story of the how you wrote the book. Isn't that the story that's in the book?
Yeah, there's lots of stories in the book, but yeah, I'll get into that right now. Okay, so I joined the reserves. That's where I get my 2 deployments in. The first deployment was really easy, or as we like to call it, gravy. The second deployment was where, okay, so I'm in a gym.
The first one you were where? Where did they send you?
They were both to Iraq. The first one was at a little place called FOB, Forward Operating Base Q West. We said it was like Key West without the bikinis. Okay. That was the gravy, easy deployment.
Right.
Whereas the second one was where all the dysfunction happened. So here's how the book started. Okay. I'm in a crappy little, it's a good little gym, but it had crappy Wi-Fi in a little town called La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm in the gym. It's late at night because my PTSD's got me so messed up. I'm a night owl and my sleep cycle is completely reversed, and I'm a complete hermit for the most part, And I'm talking to this dude and I tell him one of my stories about the time in Baghdad. He's like, dude, you need to write a book about this. I'm like, okay, sure. And without even thinking, I crack open my laptop. I get on Facebook Messenger and I got the original 4 guys from my compound that I talked to. I said, I want to tell the story of our time in Baghdad. And I said, you've got to be 100% behind me on this. You have to be 100% committed to it. Or if you're 99% committed to it, if you're 99% sure you want to do this, the story dies right here.
Right.
Within 3 minutes of me sending that message, the first guy who was in Afghanistan at the time, 3 minutes later, he sends me a message, do it, I got your back. The other 3 guys respond 3 hours later, do it, we got your back. That's how it started.
Right. And what was so special or unique, not special, unique about that story in Baghdad?
First of all, we were the only internment facility in all of Iraq to house juveniles, which is why I refer to it as the worst babysitting job ever.
Yeah.
The juveniles murdered each other about as proficiently, if not more so, than the adults.
Yeah.
We had at one point Saddam Hussein in our prison. There's a compound in that prison that was called Compound 5. I could not tell any stories about that compound because anytime I ever tried to talk to anybody about it, they said, I signed a non-disclosure agreement. Shut up and stop asking me about it. But Saddam Hussein was in that compound. That was the high value target compound. Like Tariq Aziz, the deputy prime minister, who by the way was a practicing Catholic, was in that compound. They stuffed a lot of the Republican Guard and the Ba'ath Party officials in Compound 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, I have a question about the young people, the teenagers or whatever they are.
The
Do they
juveniles.
really juvenile? Do
Yeah.
they even have a chance to do anything but kill? Growing up in a country that's been in wars for so long? Because we are products of our upbringing. We are products of what we see.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not giving them a get out of Dodge free card, but I do think that when you go to a country like that, you are indeed dealing with different people.
Okay. Before Saddam Hussein, there was a lot of good opportunities for the Iraqis to do great things, because I think there's an old saying, an old Middle Eastern saying I heard: books are they're printed in one country. I can't remember what country they're printed in. They're like they come from the wood in Lebanon, but they're read in Iraq.
Yeah.
In Baghdad in particular. So before Saddam Hussein, there were a lot of opportunities. And now that he's dead, there are a lot of opportunities again. It's like the Wild Wild West over there, from what I understand now. While we were there were opportunities, because they did have the opportunity to vote and all that, and they did have a soccer team, there were opportunities. You just had to really work to look for them. That's the thing. It was just a lot harder under Saddam Hussein for obvious reasons, So yeah, they were there. You just had to look for them and work for them. And it was challenging. I'll be honest. It really was. So yeah.
Yeah. Right. I can't imagine what that would be like. It's just so foreign to me.
Yeah.
Having never been in a situation where there's so much danger.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. When you're in a situation like that, you learn more about yourself as a human being, because what's going to happen is your higher brain functions tend to turn off and your limbic system tends to turn on, and the more natural version of you that's not pretty and sophisticated will come through, and you will really learn about yourself as a human being. Because there was one moment I wrote about in the book where I came to the absolute end of my restraint as a human being. I had never been that close to going to the most evil, barbaric place in my life until I hit that moment. And I wrote about it. And it's something I've always struggled with. I've always been ashamed of it, because I didn't do anything, but the idea of being tested that hard, it changes you forever. It's the equivalent of losing your innocence, really.
Right.
So yeah, totally get that.
But if you didn't do it, you thought it.
You're
right.
If
you didn't do it, there has to be some win there.
Well, there is a win, but what's scary is how close you come. How close I came. It was just, I've never had my restraint tested on that level, because I was hanging on by an absolute sliver.
Yeah.
I was at the absolute end of my restraint as a human being.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you never saw yourself there.
No. And it was one guy putting an elbow in my chest saying, "Don't even think about it." That's what I'm the most ashamed of, is I needed that help to keep from teetering off the edge. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, thank goodness for that friend.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. He saved you.
Yes, he did.
So you got back from Afghanistan.
Iraq. Yeah.
Afghanistan was the first location you were.
No. They were both to Iraq the first time. The first time was FOB, Forward Operating Base Q West. That was the gravy deployment. The second one was in Baghdad. It started out in Baghdad. Now, here's where the dysfunction kicks in. All that dysfunctional stuff that happened in Baghdad, that was the first of 3 units in that second deployment to Iraq. The second and the third one, I was down at a little base called FOB Talil Adder. So all that bad stuff happened on the first part of the deployment, and then I numbed out with 2 other units for another 15 months. I was in Iraq for a total of 20 months on that second deployment. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So the dysfunction happened in the first part, and then it cured and hardened, and I numbed out for the other 15 months. So I was completely, almost irreparably emotionally fried from that. That's what's made the transition so challenging.
Are you able to, when you're in the field, to get any support, that type of support, mental support?
The only mental support really is your guys. Now, we had psychiatrists there. We had a Catholic priest who literally at one point told me I had to refer to the juveniles as pint-sized international terrorists, because I was kind of getting weirdly attached to them in the sense that I was trying to be a big brother to them when I was really wasn't able to do that.
Right.
I had one shrink at Toledo Adder that I talked to, we talked about childhood stuff as the pressure was bringing all this stuff up. And on my first deployment, literally half my platoon was being cycled in and out through that shrink. Like literally, I'm about to walk in when two of my guys that I served with on that first deployment were walking out. We're looking at each other like, oh, wow. Okay. So we're just going to cycle the whole freaking platoon through. Okay. This is good to know, because we were all at each other's throats you're always almost at each other's throats by the end of the deployment. It's just kind of unavoidable.
Well, the pressure that you must be under, there's no other way you could be anything else.
Right. Exactly. And it builds and it builds and it builds, and you're trying to stay numb so you don't lose it. But then the numbness starts to irritate you, and you want to feel things again, and you want to express your anger and your feelings. And it's just a mess.
When you say you numb out, how do you do that?
You start running convoy missions and stuff like that. And you run them to the point where you're running so hot and heavy that, like, when you go to the chow hall, they'll have decorations that kind of tell you what time of year it is. And it all turns into a blur, and it turns into these snapshots where, oh, wow, it's Christmas. Oh, wow, it's Thanksgiving. Oh, dude, is it Easter already? Because you're walking around in a haze, and you're either jacked up on caffeine or half in a coma. You're jacked up on pre-workouts in the gym to get the rage out of your system. You're jacked up on caffeine or pre-workout in the gym to get ready for a mission, because you're getting intel reports that say, man, this is going to be ugly. This is going to be nasty. We're going to get hit, blah, blah, blah. So
are there lots of drugs there going on?
It's not drugs so much as they there were a couple of different supplement companies. They were putting what we like to call the good illegal stuff in the stimulants to keep us jacked up and cranked up. So we were just jacked up and cranked up on all the supplements with the good illegal stuff in it to keep us going. It's sort of like in World War II, when the tankers had their candy bars with meth in them that would keep them alive for a week, for days at a time. Right. So yeah, it was mainly that. Nothing really illegal, so to speak. It wasn't like Vietnam, with my non-vet father, where they're taking stuff called moon juice that would literally keep them completely wired for 4 days, and then they'd crash for 3 or 4.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, it was technically legal stuff, but with lots of just horribly illegal stimulants in them to keep us going. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move us on into what you call post-military life.
Yeah.
And when you came back, you started working with your support company team,
if you can call
which
it that,
would be the veterans, the VA.
Oh, This is where it's going to get ugly, because I'm not going to be graphic, but I'm going to be blunt, and yeah. So let's go.
Okay, so your experience was, when you get home, do they say go see the VA, or is that just? That's normally where you reach out for support and trying to resettle you into life, correct?
No, what they do is they when you get back stateside, you go through a fate worse than death, which is your demobilization process, which is paperwork. Okay. You go through paperwork, and then you turn in your stuff, and they brief you within an inch of your life about all your benefits, where they just run you through the assembly line in Mach 3. And you're lucky if you retain half of what they told you. And then they set it up to where they let you know, okay, we're going to set it up to where here's the paperwork, go to the VA, get whatever services you need, and get service connected,
So all that paperwork is not the VA. That's the release from the service. Correct?
That's your DD 214 is proof that you were in the United States military. So everything else is for all of your benefits that you're trying to get access to. Yeah. Okay. So, and it's just, again, it's this hot, fast moving assembly line where they just ramrod you through, and then you're pretty much on your own to find your benefits. So then you hook up with like you hook up with entities like the VFW, who I'm hooked up with now,
Yes.
and the American Legion, and like there are other nonprofits that are varying degrees of legitimate, and we're not even going to get. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I have, because I have worked with a VA here in Tyler.
Yeah.
I know just enough to be, and I just know so little about what they do, other than I
Right.
do know here they
Mhm.
really work hard to see that veterans get support. But part of the problem is we have a large community of veterans here in Tyler. And
Right.
there is a almost many of them don't take advantage of.
Well, you got to ask yourself why that is.
That is. That's why I'm asking you.
Okay. For better and here's the real problem. For better and for worse, the World War II generation, the greatest generation, for better and for worse, they are the gold standard for what the veteran is supposed to be. They are stoic. They don't ask for anything. They just do their own thing because they have trust issues. You know, every generation of veterans has their trust issues with the civilian community because of a lack of understanding. And that's a discussion, whole other discussion for a whole other time.
Yeah.
The problem with the VA is that World War II veteran who, when they're in the hospital, they pat them on the head as the World War II veteran is drooling all over himself. And basically their attitude is, okay, they don't ask for anything, so we can just do whatever we want and they'll accept it.
Yeah.
And that's the gold standard for the VA. My father's a Vietnam veteran. He has been denied his benefits for Agent Orange and I watched this man get you on the top of the screen. It says stop share. It's red. Because my father's Agent Orange, he jumped in a pool with chlorine in it and he came out of the pool that shade of red. It was the most unnatural thing I've ever seen in my life.
Oh. My
father's battles with the VA are the reason I'm so combative with the VA, because here's the problem with the VA.
Yeah.
There is in the automotive technician diagnostic protocol, there's one last step that's basically mean you can't diagnose the problem. You fail to diagnose the problem, which is, we call it fire the parts cannon, which basically says throw parts at it and guess until you fix the problem. Okay. Right. The VA, that's the VA's only step. Okay. Right. If we're being brutally honest, it really is. And I have been with the VA dealt with the VA. And I at one point, when I had my own podcast, I interviewed a veteran. His name is Chad. He literally told me about a doctor that said, you're not going to do what we tell you anyway, so why don't you commit suicide? And literally wrote him a script for enough morphine to kill him.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah.
And there are horror stories about that. I mean, I've had doctors. I had one doctor, I told him, I need you to examine, I've had 2 tailbone surgeries. Okay. And they're painful.
Yeah.
I literally had to tell this doctor to examine it and, oh, you're fine. She takes one look at it. Oh, wow, it's infected. I'm like,
yes, and it's painful.
I had a civilian doctor who they were doing who did that with the second tailbone surgery. And she's like, she didn't hear me. She didn't know I was there. She's like, we got to get him out of here because the VA is going to stop paying the bill soon.
Right. Yeah.
So the problem with the VA is their attitude is one size fits most. That's their attitude. And if you don't have insurance, you always get bottom of the barrel care. Always. Yeah. And I've got bills in the book that talks about all the bills that the VA didn't want to pay. I've had them send I've had them deny the bill, and then the bill collectors come after me. There's an incident that I'm going to talk about eventually in another book, in a writer's guide, called the New Jersey incident, where the VA, I had to work with Wounded Warrior Project to get the VA to actually pay the bill because they ultimately pawned it off on the state of New Jersey. So it's the VA needs to be
paper pushing. And it's sad that in this country, we've treated veterans that way. Yeah. It really is sad. And we need to, I don't know how it get fixed.
Here, you want to know how to fix it? I'm going to tell you right now how to fix it. Here's what you do.
15 words.
No. Here it is. Disband the VA. Completely disband them. Take all that money, convert them into individual insurance accounts for veterans, and let the VFW and the American Legion and actual legitimate, notice I said legitimate veteran nonprofits like that, empower them to help them get the health care they need. That's the solution, but it will never happen because, well, no. Let me just put it like this. I wrote a book about my time in Baghdad as a prison guard, so I know how prisoners behave. Yeah. So if the reason it'll ever happen is because if this was a prison scenario where you got two prisoners in their cell, the VA is the 350-pound cellmate, and the VA is a 120-pound soaking wet cellmate. Who you think's winning that battle? So there you go.
Well, there are mistakes made on both sides, and it's been going on for years. So it's kind of like a really headache to think about. But that doesn't give us excuse not to work on it at all. Matter of fact, I'm even having lunch with VA today. So anyway, I'll tell them about our little interview and say, do you want to listen to this interview?
Oh, they're not going to like me after this interview. They will not like me.
Oh, they will, Gene. I tell you, they will.
No, they will not. No, they will not.
You suggest I don't mention your name.
Oh, no, go ahead. Let them have it. Let them listen to it. Absolutely. Let them listen to it. But I guarantee you they will not like me after this. And I'm fine with it. I'm at peace with it. That's fine.
Tell the audience when your book is coming out. Is it
it's out already. Yet? It's out right now.
Okay.
You go on Amazon.
How could they go and get your book?
Go on Amazon. We Did Not Deserve the Crapper. It's got a picture. It's got a picture of concert, and everybody says barbed wire, but it's called concertina wire. And it's at sunset, and it's got "We did not deserve the crapper, the prison we entered but never left." And at the bottom it says, if you're looking to gain insight on how to build loyalty, respect, trust, active and effective communication skills from a military and family standpoint, what you're about to read is exactly what not to do. So this is the book on how not to act. You see what I'm saying?
And are all of your mates that contributed to the book also recognized in your book?
Oh, they're in the book. They're characters in the book. And the thing that really destroyed me was the fact that the Mr. Blonde character died before I got the book published. Was one of the that presented a serious challenge to my ability to transition. And it's one of those, it ate at me, and I still struggle with it. I'll probably struggle with it for the rest of my life. But they're all recognized. I got family members that are recognized, and I learned that I will never, ever be a project manager as a result of writing this book. But I also learned a supreme amount of sensitivity. And if you become if you have collaborators like I had and become a project manager like I essentially became, you learn how to actively listen. And you also learn that you have to not only not censor people you're collaborating with, you have to actively discourage them from censoring themselves, because then if you're not careful, you lose content. So that's what I learned.
Yeah. Well, I'm really pleased that we had this conversation, really, Gene. It was great for you to I hope your book does really well. And I think you're a pretty smart guy and pretty creative guy as to how you continued to move forward in your life with all of the things that you've had to endure.
Well, I've got a couple more projects that are actually linked to the book that I kind of mentioned. I'm going to be doing a writer's guide for I'm going to be doing a cookbook, but the weird thing is the cookbook never should have happened because I missed the sarcasm of my editor and my former publisher. You should write a cookbook. And I didn't catch the sarcasm. So I just started working on a cookbook. Because they did it pro bono. I sucked up to them by cooking the best food I possibly could. And so I started writing the cookbook because, again, I missed the sarcasm and them telling me to write the cookbook. Plus, one thing led to another. Now, because I live in North Carolina, if one thing I've learned, because I'm a veteran, the only thing that saved me from being called a Yankee in the most belligerent way possible was the fact it was my veteran cred. So in the process of writing the cookbook, I started developing decided to design a brick oven smoker so I could cook some of my stuff more proficiently, because I'm learning to cook in food in like unconventional ways, like cooking in a watermelon or cooking in a pumpkin.
Oh,
It's wild. It's really wild.
where did you develop this love for cooking?
I've been trying to get the taste of MRE out of my mouth from all the nasty food I ate in the military. That's mainly where it comes from, because it's all about, when you're in the military, it's all about getting comfort food wherever you can get it, so you can cope with the insanity that's going on around you. And what it's going to turn into, the brick oven I designed, and because I needed to learn how to use a smoker, I'm mashing them together into what I call a hybrid brick oven smoker. I'm going to pair that hybrid brick oven smoker with the cookbook to help veterans battle their isolation issues, which is a horribly prominent symptom of PTSD. So the plan will be, the cookbook gets you from your man cave, woman cave, into the kitchen. The smoker gets you from the kitchen out of the house. So that's the plan there.
We are going to say goodbye now.
Okay.
And it's really been a growth experience for me. You've thrown in a lot of things there. I'm glad to know you had a podcast for a while. So you're a fellow podcaster.
Well, eventually I'll get back into the podcasting game.
Yeah.
I've got an Intel buddy that wants to jump back in it, and I'll jump back in it with him, just so I can be sociable. And that's also another way of battling my isolation issues. So yeah, you got to fight that everywhere you can.
Okay. Well, I certainly do thank you for being here. And
thank you.
I wish you the best.
Thank you.
And your book becomes a bestseller. How's that?
So there you go.
All right. Well, I'm going to tell my guests that I look forward to talking to them next week, my listeners, and I hope that their week is full of joy and good times. So come back next week. We'll have another great show. Thanks for being here.
Joyce Buford returns next week at the same time for another edition of Second Wind. Through the Joyce Buford Empowerment System, women are receiving the support they need through their transitions and are able to reclaim their true purpose with confidence. They receive the tools they need to map out new lives. You can find out more about her coaching services at joycebufordempowers.com.